She called me just a little assistant while I was orchestrating a $3.1 billion merger codenamed Morning Glory. I was arranging limousines for the CEO, hiding meeting schedules in dental appointment apps, and she thought I just ordered coffee. When you work in the shadows for 12 years, you don't need power. You need information. And I held every key until she kicked me out. Then discovered I was the one holding the treasure map. My name is Amanda Ross. I'm 38, though most people guess younger something about the way I carry myself. Quietly efficient and deliberately unremarkable. For over a decade, I've been the executive assistant at Halden Ridge, one of America's largest telecommunications conglomerates. The title on my business card reads Senior Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer. But that barely scratches the surface of what I actually do. I'm the gatekeeper, the scheduler, the memory, the vault. I know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, of course. I know which board members are having affairs, which executives are interviewing with competitors, and which acquisitions we're planning 6 months before anyone in middle management hears whispers. I've coordinated midnight meetings in airport lounges, arranged for medical procedures that never appeared on any official calendar, and redirected potential PR disasters before they made headlines. All from my modest desk outside Kenneth Halden's corner office on the 47th floor of Halden Tower in downtown Chicago. When I started at Halden Ridge 12 years ago, I was fresh out of a master's program in business administration, armed with a perfect GPA and absolutely zero connections. The assistant position wasn't my dream job, it was the only door that opened, but I quickly realized something that would shape my entire career in the executive suite. Assistants are invisible, and invisible people see everything. I learned to type without looking at my keyboard, to remember conversations verbatim, to anticipate needs before they were voiced. I mastered the art of being in a room without being noticed. Kenneth Mr. Halden, officially. Though he insisted on Kenneth after my 3rd year, came to rely on me for everything. Not just coffee and calendars, but confidential intelligence, strategic insights, and discreet crisis management. Amanda knows more about running this company than half the executive team. He once told a visiting board member, who smiled politely and promptly forgot my existence. That was fine by me. I didn't need recognition. I needed information. And for 12 years, I collected it, organized it, and wielded it carefully to keep Halden Ridge running smoothly. Until Madison Halden arrived. It was a Tuesday morning in April when Kenneth called me into his office. Spring in Chicago is a fickle thing. One day, brilliant sunshine. The next, sleeting rain. That day was the latter. Droplets racing down the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lake Michigan. Amanda, sit down, Kenneth said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. At 65, he was still imposing, over 6 feet tall with a full head of silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. But lately, I'd noticed a heaviness to his movements, a slight hesitation before making decisions. I sat back straight, notepad ready. I'm bringing Madison in, he said without preamble. Madison, his only daughter. 29 years old and, from what I knew, which was quite a lot, the very definition of a nepotism hire. MBA from Harvard, yes, but bottom quartile of her class. 3 failed startup attempts in 5 years. A social media presence that HR would have flagged as problematic for any normal employee. She'll be taking the VP of Innovation Culture position we discussed creating last quarter, he continued. I kept my face neutral, though internally my eyebrows had shot to my hairline. We hadn't discussed creating any such position. I would know. I kept the minutes of every executive meeting. I see, I said, making a note. When does she start? Monday. Kenneth rubbed his temple. Look, Amanda, I know what you're thinking. I doubted that very much. She needs structure, direction. She's brilliant, just unfocused. This company will be hers someday. And she needs to learn the ropes from the ground up. The ground up? As vice president with an invented title. Of course, I said. I'll prepare her onboarding package and set up the necessary accounts and access. Thank you. He seemed relieved, as though he'd expected resistance. And Amanda. She'll need a good mentor here, someone who knows the company inside and out. I understood the unspoken request. Babysit my daughter. Show her the ropes. Make her look good. I'll be sure she has everything she needs, I replied carefully. Kenneth nodded, satisfied. Good. That's why you're the best, Amanda. You always understand what needs to be done. I did understand. I understood that Madison Halden was about to become my problem. What I didn't understand yet was just how much of a problem she would be. The first time I met Madison Halden in person was the following Monday. 8:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch when the elevator doors opened, revealing a woman who could only be Kenneth's daughter. The Halden features were unmistakable: the high cheekbones, the straight nose, the confident set of the jaw. But where Kenneth's eyes were thoughtful, hers were calculating. Where his confidence came from experience, hers reeked of entitlement. She stepped out of the elevator trailing the scent of expensive perfume, dressed in a sleek pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes swept over the reception area, over me, and then back to me with the dawning realization that I was there to greet her. You must be the assistant, she said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Amanda Ross, I confirmed, extending my hand. Welcome to Halden Ridge, Ms. Halden. She took my hand briefly, her grip loose, dismissive. Madison, please. Ms. Halden is my mother, and she's been dead for 7 years. An odd introduction. I knew exactly when Diana Halden had died. I'd arranged the funeral. After all. Of course, Madison. Your father asked me to show you to your office and help you get settled. Daddy's always so thoughtful, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lead the way, honey. Honey, strike one. I led her through the executive floor, past glass-walled offices and the curious glances of early arriving employees. Madison's office was next to her father's, a corner space with views of both the lake and the city. Kenneth had insisted on it, displacing our CFO, who'd been quietly fuming ever since. Here we are, I said, opening the door to a freshly decorated office, modern furniture, abstract art. A desktop computer and laptop both set up with her credentials. Your login information is in the welcome packet on your desk. It is available if you need any assistance with systems access. Madison walked a slow circle around the room, trailing her fingers over surfaces, inspecting. It's smaller than I expected. It was 400 square feet of prime Chicago real estate with a view people would kill for. I can speak to facilities about alternatives if it doesn't meet your needs, I offered neutrally. She waved a dismissive hand. This is fine for now. I'll be moving into something more suitable once I've established my department. Her department, the one that didn't exist beyond a title on an organizational chart. Of course. Your calendar has been set up with introductory meetings with each department head throughout this week. I've scheduled a breakfast with your father tomorrow at 7:30 to discuss your first initiatives. She dropped into the chair behind her desk, swiveling to look out at the lake. Cancel the department head meetings. I'll meet them as needed, and make the breakfast with Daddy for 9:00 instead. I'm not a morning person. I made a mental note. Kenneth had been starting his days at 6:30 a.m. for the 27 years he'd been CEO. He had board calls at 9:00 a.m. every Tuesday. I'm afraid your father has standing commitments at 9:00. Would 8:15 work as a compromise? Madison turned back to face me, one perfectly shaped eyebrow raised. Are you telling me my father can't move his schedule for me? I'm providing information so you can make an informed decision, I replied, my tone professional. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't friendly. Aren't you thorough? Fine. 8:15. Now, be a dear and get me a latte double shot. Oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, no foam. I had arranged $200 million in corporate financing, managed the confidential termination of a sexual harassment investigation against a board member, and orchestrated a covert meeting between Kenneth and the President of the United States. And now I was being sent for coffee. The executive kitchen is fully stocked with a barista-grade espresso machine and several milk alternatives, I said. I'd be happy to show you. I didn't ask for a tour. Amanda. Madison cut in, her voice hard despite the smile still fixed on her face. I asked for a latte. That's what assistants do. Isn't it, assist? I could have pointed out that I was her father's assistant, not hers. I could have mentioned that Halden Ridge employed a full cafeteria staff one floor down. I could have noted that at her level, she had access to the executive dining room where anything she wanted would be prepared for her. Instead, I nodded once. Of course, I'll be right back. As I turned to leave, she added, Oh, and honey, make sure it's hot this time. This time, as if I'd brought her coffee before, as if I'd failed at even that simple task. Strike two. I returned 17 minutes later with her latte, prepared exactly to her specifications. She took a sip, made a face, and set it aside. Too sweet, remember that for next time. I had made it with exactly 2 pumps of vanilla, as requested, but I just nodded. Will there be anything else? Madison was already looking at her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be Instagram. That's all for now. I'm sure you have whatever it is you normally do to get back to. I left her office without another word, closing the door softly behind me. In the reflection of the glass wall, I caught a glimpse of her picking up the latte again, taking another sip, and smiling with satisfaction. It was going to be a long day. The first week of Madison's employment set the tone for our relationship. She arrived late, left early, and spent the hours in between making unreasonable demands and undermining my authority with other staff. She referred to me exclusively as the assistant when speaking to others, and various diminutives honey, sweetie, dear when addressing me directly. On Thursday, she accidentally spilled her smoothie over the quarterly reports I had prepared for her father's board meeting. I spent 2 hours recreating them. On Friday, she asked me to make dinner reservations for her and her friends at Alinea Chicago's most exclusive restaurant with 2 hours' notice. When I managed to secure a table by calling in a favor from the maitre d', whose daughter had interned at Halden Ridge the previous summer, she didn't even acknowledge the feat. By the end of the second week, it was clear that Madison's primary function at Halden Ridge was to attend long lunches, post corporate platitudes on LinkedIn, and make my life difficult. But I could handle difficult. I'd been managing Kenneth Halden's life for 12 years. I could certainly manage his daughter's petty power plays. What I couldn't have anticipated was how quickly she would set her sights on something bigger, my job. The first sign came 3 weeks after her arrival. I was reviewing Kenneth's schedule for an upcoming trip to Tokyo when Madison sauntered up to my desk. Amanda, be a dear and clear my schedule for next Thursday and Friday. I'm going to join Daddy on his Japan trip. I looked up, carefully neutral. I wasn't aware you were planning to attend the Tokyo meetings. Last-minute decision, she said with a wave of her hand. Daddy thinks it would be good exposure for me to see how international negotiations work. Book me on his flights, and make sure my hotel room is on the same floor. This was news to me, and I knew all of Kenneth's plans. Of course, I'll need to adjust the meeting schedules to accommodate your presence. Which sessions will you be attending? She leaned against my desk, crossing her arms. All of them, obviously, including the private dinner with Minister Tanaka. It's limited to 3 people per side due to the sensitivity of the discussions. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, including that one. Remove whoever you need to. I'm sure Daddy would prefer to have me there. I doubted that very much. The dinner with Minister Tanaka was to discuss potential regulatory changes that would significantly impact Halden Ridge's expansion plans in Asia. Kenneth had specifically selected our chief legal officer and head of international markets to accompany him. I'll discuss the adjustment with your father, I said. Don't bother, I already did. She straightened, adjusting her jacket. Oh, and I'll need all the briefing materials for the trip by tomorrow morning. The complete set, not the sanitized version you probably prepare for the lesser executives. The implication that I created different levels of briefing materials that I would withhold information from legitimate stakeholders was both insulting and false. But more concerning was her claim that she'd already spoken to Kenneth about the Tokyo trip. In the 12 years I'd worked for him, Kenneth had never made a significant schedule change without informing me first. "I'll prepare everything right away," I said, "though I'm surprised your father didn't mention the change to me this morning." It was a small challenge, carefully phrased. Madison's smile tightened. "Maybe he doesn't tell you everything, Amanda. You're just an assistant, after all." There it was, strike three. "Just an assistant," I repeated, my tone light. "Of course, I'll make the arrangements." As soon as she walked away, I sent a message to Kenneth. "Do you have a moment to discuss the Tokyo itinerary? Some questions have come up." Within 5 minutes, I was in his office. "What's up, Amanda?" Kenneth asked, glancing up from his computer. "Madison just informed me that she'll be joining you in Tokyo next week," I said. "Including the dinner with Minister Tanaka. I wanted to confirm before making the arrangements." Kenneth's brow furrowed. "That's the first I'm hearing of it. The Tanaka dinner is limited to 3 people, and we need Jacob and May there for the regulatory discussions." "Just as I'd thought." "I see. Madison indicated you had already approved her participation?" Kenneth sighed heavily, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "She's been eager to get involved. But no, I never approved this. The Tokyo trip is too important to turn into a learning experience." I nodded, careful to keep any satisfaction from showing on my face. "Would you like me to speak with her, or would you prefer to address it directly?" "I'll talk to her," he said, but I could see the reluctance in his expression. Kenneth Halden, the man who had stared down hostile takeovers and government investigations, was uncomfortable confronting his own daughter. "Very well, let me know if you need me to adjust any schedules afterward." As I turned to leave, Kenneth called after me. "Amanda, how is she doing? Really?" A loaded question. I chose my words carefully. "Madison is very confident. She's certainly making her presence known." Kenneth nodded slowly. "She just needs time to find her place here. She's always been headstrong, even as a little girl." Headstrong wasn't the word I would have chosen. "I'm sure she'll settle in," I said diplomatically. Later that afternoon, Madison stormed past my desk without a word, her face tight with fury. She slammed her office door hard enough that heads turned throughout the executive floor. Kenneth emerged from his office a moment later, looking drained. "She's not going to Tokyo," he said quietly. "I understand. I'll keep her on the schedule here." He hesitated, then added, "She thinks you went behind her back." I simply confirmed the change, as I would with any significant alteration to your schedule, I replied evenly. "I know," he sighed. "Just try to work with her. Amanda. She's family." Family. The word explained so much about why Madison was here and why she would be tolerated regardless of her behavior. "Of course," I assured him. "I'm here to support both of you." What I didn't say was that Madison had just made a critical mistake. She had lied about her father's approval, assuming I wouldn't verify. She had underestimated me because I was just an assistant. It was a mistake many had made before her. None had made it twice. In the weeks that followed, Madison's attitude toward me chilled from dismissive to openly hostile. She excluded me from meetings I would normally attend, redirected my emails to her instead of her father, and assigned me menial tasks that would keep me away from my desk. I adapted, as I always did. I set up forwarding rules to ensure I still received essential communications. I cultivated relationships with Madison's new executive assistant, Tara, a nervous young woman who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by Madison's demands and grateful for any help I could provide. I worked through lunches and stayed late, ensuring that nothing fell through the cracks despite Madison's interference. But I also started documenting everything, every inappropriate request, every misleading statement, every attempt to undermine my position. I kept it all in an encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive, accessible only to me. Not because I planned to use it at least. Not yet, but because 12 years of working in corporate America had taught me that information was the only real insurance policy. Madison, meanwhile, was building her innovation culture department. In practice, This seemed to consist of hiring friends from business school into vaguely defined roles with impressive titles and significant salaries. They occupied a newly renovated section of the 46th floor, complete with a cold brew coffee bar, meditation pods, and an indoor putting green. The ostensible purpose was to infuse startup thinking into our corporate DNA, as Madison explained in an all-company email. The actual output, as far as anyone could tell, was precisely 0. Kenneth, however, seemed pleased. "She's bringing fresh energy to the place," he told me after a particularly enthusiastic presentation where Madison had unveiled a word cloud of innovation principles generated from a 3-day retreat at a luxury resort in Sedona. I just nodded and made a note to follow up on the actual deliverables, which had been conspicuously absent from the presentation. Then came the day I overheard a conversation that changed everything. It was late, past 7, and the executive floor was nearly deserted. I was at my desk, finalizing details for a series of confidential meetings Kenneth would be having in New York the following week. Madison's door was closed, but her voice carried through the thin glass walls of the modern office design. "It's all coming together, Drew. The old man doesn't suspect a thing." Drew Blackwood, Madison's boyfriend of 3 months, and, coincidentally, a junior partner at Orchestel Halden Ridge's largest competitor. I had run a background check when they first started dating, flagging the potential conflict of interest to Kenneth. He had dismissed my concerns, assuring me that Madison knew to keep her personal and professional lives separate. I moved quietly from my desk to the water cooler, positioning myself to better hear without being obvious. "The Morning Glory deal closes next month," Madison continued. "Daddy's throwing everything behind it. $3.1 billion for a company that's basically a glorified infrastructure play. It's insane." Morning Glory, the code name for our acquisition of Valoris Group, a mid-sized telecommunications provider with extensive fiber optic networks across the rural Midwest. The deal had been in the works for over a year, conducted with unusual secrecy even by Kenneth's standards. The potential acquisition was known to only 8 people in the entire company. Make that 9, apparently. Once it's announced, our stock will take a hit. Analysts think we're overpaying by at least 20%. That's when I make my move. The board is already nervous about Daddy's recent decisions. If I position myself as the voice of reason with a solid alternative strategy. A pause, presumably while Drew responded, "No, he'll be fine. Comfortable retirement, generous package. The board just needs a gentle push to see that it's time for the next generation of leadership. And once I'm in the CEO seat, we can revisit that partnership idea we discussed." My blood ran cold. Madison was plotting to leverage the Valoris acquisition, a cornerstone of her father's legacy strategy, to force him out, and apparently planning to explore some kind of partnership with Orchestel afterward. Anyway, I should go. Just wanted to update you. And yes, I'm still working on getting rid of the watchdog. Amanda knows too much and she's too loyal to Daddy. I've already got HR reviewing a reorganization plan that moves her to the shared assistant pool. She'll quit within a week rather than take the demotion. I silently returned to my desk, my mind racing. Madison wasn't just an entitled nuisance. She was actively working to undermine her father and possibly the entire company. And she was planning to remove me from my position not because I was incompetent, but because I knew too much and she couldn't control me. I sat down heavily, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. In 12 years, I had never betrayed Kenneth's trust. I had been the ultimate loyal soldier, putting the company's interests, his interests, above my own countless times. But this was different. Madison was using her position, a position she had only because of nepotism, to plot against her own father. And she was casually discussing my career, my livelihood, as if it were nothing more than an inconvenient furniture arrangement to be updated. I looked at the calendar on my screen. The Valoris acquisition was scheduled to be finalized in 22 days. The contracts were drawn up, the financing secured. All that remained was the final signing and the public announcement. 22 days in which Madison would continue plotting, continue undermining both her father and me. 22 days during which I could do nothing, or I could do something. The decision wasn't made in an instant. It formed slowly. crystallizing over the next several days as I watched Madison operate with increasing boldness. She began excluding Kenneth from meetings with key stakeholders, positioning herself as the new face of leadership. She hired a personal PR consultant who secured her spots on 30 under 30 lists and profile pieces in business magazines. She continued to treat me with casual disdain, unaware that I had overheard her plans. One morning, she accidentally knocked over my coffee mug, sending hot liquid cascading over my desk and ruining the physical copies of the valorous due diligence reports I had been reviewing. "Oops," she said with mock concern. "You should really be more careful with sensitive materials, Amanda. Anyone could see them just lying around like that." As I mopped up the mess, my decision solidified. I waited until Thursday. Kenneth was in Washington, D.C. for meetings with the FCC. Madison was having a strategy lunch with her innovation team at an upscale restaurant downtown. The executive floor was quiet, the normal mid-afternoon lull in full effect. I had prepared meticulously. Over the past week, I had carefully copied key documents related to the Valoris acquisition to a secure, encrypted drive. Nothing obvious, not the contracts or the formal due diligence reports. Those would be missed, and the leak could be traced. Instead, I took meeting notes, email exchanges, financial projections that hadn't made it into the final reports, pieces that, when assembled, would tell the story of the acquisition without containing any smoking guns that could be traced back to me. I had also created a Proton Mail account using a VPN and a temporary phone number, accessing it only from public Wi-Fi networks away from my home or office. That afternoon, I told my assistant I was stepping out for a late lunch. Instead, I walked 6 blocks to a small independent bookstore with a public Wi-Fi network and no security cameras. I sat in a corner with my personal laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi through my VPN, and composed a simple email. To press Irkastul Subject: Halden Ridge's 3.1B acquisition of Valoris Group. Details. Attached, please find information regarding Halden Ridge's imminent acquisition of Valoris Group, scheduled to be announced on June 17th. The $3.1 billion deal has been conducted under the code name Morning Glory and represents a significant overpayment based on Valoris's actual financial position. The acquisition strategy was personally driven by Kenneth Halden, despite concerns from multiple executives about the valuation. The deal financing will increase Halden Ridge's debt ratio by 23% and potentially impact its credit rating. This information may be of interest to your strategic planning team. A concerned observer. I attached a carefully curated selection of documents, stripped of metadata and with any identifying markers removed. Nothing confidential enough to trigger legal action, but enough to make it clear that the leak was legitimate and from someone with inside access. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. 12 years of loyalty weighed against 6 weeks of disrespect and scheming. Kenneth's trust against Madison's betrayal. My career against her casual plans to discard me. I clicked send. Then I deleted the email account, cleared my browser history, shut down my laptop, and bought a paperback mystery novel that I would never read. I walked back to the office, stopping for an actual lunch at a deli that I frequented regularly. Normal behavior, traceable, explainable behavior. By the time I returned to my desk, the email would have been received at Orchestel. What happened next would depend on whether they recognized the value of what I had sent them. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The following Monday, 3 days before the Valoris acquisition was set to be announced, Orchestel called a surprise press conference. Their CEO, Richard Oakes, stood before a room of journalists and calmly announced that Orchestel was prepared to make a competing offer for Valoris Group at $3.5 billion, a full 13% higher than Halden Ridge's offer. "We believe Valoris's infrastructure represents a strategic asset for the future of telecommunications in underserved markets," Oakes said, using phrasing eerily similar to Kenneth's own internal justifications for the acquisition. "We are prepared to move quickly to secure this partnership." The reaction was immediate. Halden Ridge's stock dropped 7% within an hour of the announcement. Valoris's stock surged 22% as investors anticipated a bidding war. Financial analysts began speculating about how Orchestel had identified the opportunity and assembled financing so quickly. Kenneth, who had returned from Washington the previous evening, called an emergency meeting of his executive team. Madison was notably absent, having called in sick after a weekend of particularly vigorous social media posting from various nightclubs. How the hell did Orchestel know about this? Kenneth demanded, his face flushed with anger. We've kept this tighter than anything we've ever done. No one had an answer. The chief legal officer suggested a formal investigation into the leak. The CFO was already running numbers on whether we could afford to increase our offer. The head of strategy was questioning whether we should walk away entirely rather than engage in a bidding war that would further inflate Valoris's already generous valuation. I sat quietly in my usual spot against the wall, taking notes, observing. No one looked at me. No one ever did. The meeting concluded with Kenneth deciding to accelerate our timeline. We announce tomorrow, he declared, before Orchestel can generate more momentum, and we stick to our price. Valoris agreed to our terms. They can honor that commitment. It was a bold strategy, but I knew it wouldn't work, not because Orchestel's offer was higher, but because the leak had shattered the confidence behind our offer. The market already believed we were overpaying. Now it looked like we were both overpaying and being outmaneuvered by our chief rival. The next 24 hours were chaos. Kenneth worked through the night, calling board members, reassuring key investors, preparing for the accelerated announcement. I stayed with him, ordering meals, managing communications, keeping everything functioning despite the crisis. Madison finally appeared late that afternoon, looking surprisingly refreshed for someone who had claimed to be ill. She swept into Kenneth's office without knocking, interrupting a call with our legal team. Daddy, we need to talk about the Orchestel situation. Kenneth held up a finger, finished his call, then fixed his daughter with an unusually stern look. Where have you been? We've been in crisis mode for 24 hours. Madison waved dismissively. Food poisoning. Brutal. But I'm here now, and we need to reevaluate our entire approach to Valoris. The announcement goes out tomorrow morning, Kenneth said firmly. We're proceeding as planned. That's a mistake, Madison replied, perching on the edge of his desk. The market already thinks we're overpaying. Orchestel's offer just confirms it. We should walk away, let them overpay, and focus on organic growth instead. My team has been developing an alternative strategy that... Your team, Kenneth interrupted. The innovation group that's been here for all of 2 months. This acquisition has been in development for over a year. Madison, it's the cornerstone of our rural expansion strategy. A strategy that clearly has significant weaknesses if Orchestel can swoop in at the last minute, she countered. The board is concerned, Daddy. I've been getting calls all day. My head snapped up from my notes. Madison had been receiving calls from board members. That was unusual, to say the least. Board communications typically went through Kenneth or the corporate secretary. Kenneth's eyes narrowed slightly. Which board members have been calling you? Madison hesitated, just for a second. Edward Morgan, Patricia Levine, a few others. The chairman and the head of the compensation committee, both of whom had expressed reservations about the Valoris acquisition in prior board meetings. I see, Kenneth said, his voice deceptively calm. And what exactly did you tell them? Only that we need to reconsider our options. That sometimes leadership means knowing when to change course. The implication was clear, at least to me. Madison was positioning herself as the reasonable alternative, just as she had outlined to Drew Blackwood in the call I'd overheard. Kenneth was silent for a long moment, studying his daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he said, Amanda, would you excuse us? Please, Madison and I need to have a private conversation. I gathered my things and left without a word, closing the door behind me. Through the glass, I could see Kenneth standing now, his posture rigid with anger. Madison remained perched on his desk, her body language casual, confident. I couldn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. The battle lines had been drawn. Madison had made her move, leveraging the crisis I had helped create to challenge her father's leadership. The question now was whether Kenneth would recognize what was happening, or whether his blind spot for his daughter would prove to be his undoing. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of Halden Ridge's executive team. The announcement was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. Eastern Time. By 7:00 a.m., we had received word that Orchestel had increased their offer to $3.7 billion, a full 19% higher than our bid. Valoris's board had convened an emergency meeting to consider the competing offers. At 7:32 a.m., their decision came through. They were accepting Orchestel's offer. Kenneth received the news in his office, with only me present. I watched as he read the email, his face draining of color. "They're going with Orchestel," he said, his voice hollow. "After everything we've done, all the assurances they gave us." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not for my role in what had happened, but for the position Kenneth now found himself in. He had staked his reputation on this acquisition. Its failure, in such a public and humiliating manner, would leave him vulnerable. Just as Madison had planned, Kenneth spent the next hour calling board members, trying to get ahead of the narrative. I could tell from his side of the conversations that Madison had indeed been busy. Several directors were already questioning the wisdom of the original deal, suggesting that perhaps Orchestel's intervention had saved us from a costly mistake. By noon, Halden Ridge's stock had fallen 19%, its largest single-day drop in over a decade. Financial news networks were running special segments analyzing the failed acquisition attempt and speculating about leadership issues at the company. Madison was nowhere to be seen, having left the building shortly after her confrontation with her father the previous day. At 2:17 p.m., Kenneth called me into his office. He looked exhausted, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "Amanda," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I need to ask you something, and I need absolute honesty." I sat, my expression neutral. "Of course." He looked at me directly, his gaze searching. "Did you know about Madison's conversations with the board?" A careful question, not accusatory, but probing. I was aware that she had been in contact with some board members. I replied truthfully, "I didn't know the extent or content of those communications until yesterday." Kenneth nodded slowly. "And the leak about Valoris. Do you have any suspicions about where it might have come from?" This was more dangerous territory. I kept my voice steady. The circle of people who knew about the acquisition was very small. Anyone with that information would understand its value to our competitors. "That's not an answer, Amanda." "No," I acknowledged. "It's not, because I don't have one. But I would suggest looking at who benefits most from the deal's failure." Kenneth leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "You think Madison leaked it?" I chose my words with extreme care. "I think Madison has been very open about her desire for a leadership position. I think she has been critical of the Valoris acquisition from the beginning. And I think she has been in a relationship with Drew Blackwood from Orchestel for the past 3 months." Kenneth's eyes widened at this last point. "Drew works for Orchestel. Why wasn't I informed of this?" "You were," I said quietly. "In a memo dated April 12th when they first began dating, you said Madison knew to keep her personal and professional lives separate." He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "God, Amanda, I've been a fool, haven't I?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "The board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," he continued after a moment. "To discuss the path forward," they said. "But we both know what that means. A vote of confidence, or rather, no confidence." "What can I do?" I asked. Kenneth gave me a sad smile. "Nothing. This time, this is a battle I need to fight on my own. But thank you, Amanda, for everything. You've been the one constant I could rely on." The irony of his gratitude wasn't lost on me. The board meeting took place the following morning. I wasn't present, of course, but I didn't need to be. The outcome was announced by press release at 11:23 a.m. Halden Ridge announces leadership transition. Kenneth Halden to step down as CEO, assume chairman role. Madison Halden named interim CEO. Search committee formed for permanent replacement. It was couched in the usual corporate euphemisms, a planned transition, a natural evolution. gratitude for years of service, but the reality was clear. Kenneth had been pushed out, and Madison, at least temporarily, had won. She wasted no time claiming her victory. By noon, she had moved into her father's corner office. By 2:10 p.m., she had called an all-hands meeting to outline her vision for a revitalized Halden Ridge. By 4:00 p.m., she had asked HR to begin the process of restructuring the executive support functions. Just as she had told Drew Blackwood, I was being moved to the shared assistant pool. The HR director, a woman I had known for nearly a decade, delivered the news with genuine regret. It's not performance-related, Amanda. You've been exemplary. It's just, the new CEO wants to bring in her own executive assistant. I understand, I said, and I did. This wasn't about my skills or my value. It was about Madison eliminating a potential threat, someone who knew too much and couldn't be controlled. You'll maintain your salary and benefits, the HR director assured me, just with a different reporting structure and, well, different responsibilities. Different responsibilities, like ordering lunch for mid-level managers and scheduling conference rooms. After 12 years of being at the center of the company's most critical operations, I was being relegated to administrative busywork. Madison didn't even have the courtesy to deliver the news herself, but she did make a point of stopping by my desk as I was packing up my personal items later that afternoon. Amanda, she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. I heard about the restructuring, such a shame, but I'm sure you'll thrive in your new role. I looked up at her. This woman who had systematically dismantled her father's legacy and my career in the span of 6 weeks. She was wearing a new outfit, a designer dress I recognized from a recent fashion magazine, likely purchased to celebrate her victory. Congratulations on your promotion, I said mildly. I'm sure you've worked very hard for it. Her smile faltered slightly at my lack of visible distress. Well, yes, it's been a challenging time for the company. But sometimes fresh perspective is what's needed. No hard feelings, I hope. I smiled then, a small, private smile. None at all. We all end up exactly where we deserve to be. Don't you think? Something in my tone must have unsettled her, because she took a small step back. Yes. Well, good luck with everything. Amanda. Thank you, Madison. I wish you all the success you've earned. She walked away, already focused on her next conquest, already dismissing me from her thoughts. Just an assistant, after all, no longer relevant. That evening, I composed a resignation email. 52 words, professional and dispassionate. I scheduled it to send automatically at 8:00 a.m. the following morning, when I would already be halfway to my apartment, never to return to Halden Ridge Tower. Before leaving, I did one final thing. I deleted every file from my personal drives, every document I had collected, every record of Madison's misconduct, every piece of evidence that might have implicated me in the leak. Not because I feared discovery, my tracks had been covered too carefully for that, but because I no longer needed them. The game was over. Madison had won the battle for Halden Ridge, but in doing so, she had lost something far more valuable, the acquisition that would have secured the company's future in rural markets. The stock price that would have funded its next phase of growth, the trust of the very board members who had temporarily elevated her, many of whom were already expressing private concerns about her readiness for the role. And most importantly, she had lost me, the one person who knew where all the bodies were buried, who held all the institutional knowledge that kept the complex machinery of Halden Ridge functioning smoothly. Knowledge that couldn't be replaced by a fresh-faced assistant from her innovation team, no matter how loyal they might be. I walked out of Halden Ridge Tower for the last time at 7:43 p.m., carrying a small box of personal items. Security nodded at me sympathetically as I passed. Word of my reassignment had already spread throughout the building. Outside, the early summer evening was warm, the sky still bright. I stood for a moment, looking up at the gleaming tower with the Halden Ridge logo illuminated at its peak. For 12 years, that building had been the center of my professional universe. Now I was walking away, by my own choice. I felt no regret, no guilt, only a quiet satisfaction. 3 months later, I was working as an administrative coordinator at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The pay was less, the hours were better, and my responsibilities were straightforward. I organized department schedules, managed supply inventories, and coordinated with insurance companies. No corporate intrigue, no midnight crisis calls, no international deals hanging on my ability to arrange last-minute flights to Tokyo. It was peaceful, ordinary, sometimes even boring. I loved it. On a crisp September morning, I was walking to work along Michigan Avenue when a familiar name on a newspaper headline caught my eye. Orchestel completes acquisition of Halden Ridge in $4.2 billion deal. I bought the paper and read the full story over coffee at a nearby cafe, following the failed Valoris acquisition and Madison's controversial appointment as interim CEO. Halden Ridge's stock had continued to decline. The board had never named a permanent replacement, instead entertaining acquisition offers from several competitors. Orchestel, flush with the success of their Valoris purchase, had emerged as the winning bidder. Kenneth Halden had resigned from the board entirely. Madison had been given a strategic advisor role that everyone understood to be a graceful exit. The Halden family's controlling interest in the company, built over 3 generations, had been sold for cash and stock options. The article included a quote from Richard Oakes, Orchestel's CEO. "We've long admired Halden Ridge's market position and customer relationships. This acquisition represents a natural synergy between our organizations and will allow us to better serve consumers across all markets." Corporate speak for we won. 2 weeks later, on my way to work, I took a detour past Halden Ridge Tower. Workers on scaffolding were removing the familiar blue and silver logo from the top of the building. In its place, they were installing Orchestel's distinctive orange emblem. I stopped and watched for a few minutes, just another anonymous pedestrian on a busy Chicago street. No one would have guessed that the quiet woman in the sensible shoes had once been at the center of the corporate drama that had led to this moment. No one would have imagined that just an assistant had set in motion the chain of events that had brought down a telecommunications giant. As I turned to continue my walk to the hospital, I smiled to myself. Madison had been right about one thing: information was power. She had just fatally underestimated who really held that information and what they might do when pushed too far. I never saw Madison Halden again. Occasionally, her name would appear in society pages or business profiles, always described as a former tech executive or business strategist. Kenneth retired to his lake house in Michigan, largely withdrawing from public life. As for me, I continued my quiet, ordinary existence at the hospital. No one there knew about my past at Halden Ridge, and I preferred it that way. I was just Amanda from administration, reliable and unremarkable. Just an assistant, and that was perfectly fine with me.